So in these videos, we started creating this data-driven framework, and we also used some external data sheets, some Excel sheets in here. So we imported data from our Excel sheet, which is this sheet right here. I'll show you. So this sheet is giving us all of this data, all this input data for the mortgage calculator, loan amount, loan term, the interest rate, and also the expected monthly payment. We are comparing that within our script. So as you can see, if we put 200,000 as a loan amount and the loan term, it's fetching this data, all of this data, and putting it into the application, right? So it's basically reading these columns. So it will read whatever is presented within these columns. If we have multiple data, if we have, let's say, 100 sets of rows, thousands and thousands of sets of rows, it will execute this script with all of that data one by one. So let's give it a try. Let's put 300,000 here. Let's say 5 years. Interest rate is, let's put 7%. And the monthly payment, we don't know, so I'll just put the same. Because I don't know what to expect, what the expected result should be. So for this input data, I don't know what the expected result is. So let's still see what this executes, and it should still give us a pass or fail for the monthly payment. So let's see if this executes with multiple sets of data, 200,000 and 300,000. So we'll save it. And let's try to run this and see what happens. So it opens calculator.net, enters 200,000, 30 years, clicks on calculate, tries to verify the results, closes the browser, and it immediately goes back and opens the browser again, and this time it puts 300,000, right? So as we can see, as much data as we put in here, it will execute the test script based on each and every data that we provide in these rows here. We can keep adding, and executing the test over and over. So that's a good way to test if you have multiple sets of data. Now, what if you need to just take one data, one column or one specific row? What if your script needs to read, instead of reading the whole column, what if you wanted to read just one set of data, just this first set of data, or maybe just the second one, okay? So a specific column or a specific row. In this case, what do we do? So in this case, we can actually write a different function for that. So we have to write some different code for fetching the data. For fetching data from a multiple row, multiple column. So let's try to write a function for that, for fetching a specific column in a specific row. So I have the code that I have written previously. So let's walk through this code. So this is the code, or this is the function specifically. So the function name, we'll name it read data. Then we have to do a fetch cell data count, and then we add a sheet, and we name the sheet as data import. So basically we're adding a sheet into this QTP data table. Then we will import our sheet into this sheet, which we add into the QTP data table. Okay? Then we basically have to get the row count, which makes sense because if you go back to the Excel sheet, if you want to fetch particular data from a certain column and a certain row, then you have to know how many rows and how many columns it has. So you have to count that. So that's exactly what this is doing. It's counting, it's doing a row count for this sheet, for this column. Then you'll do a column count. Okay? So then you're going to put in a for loop. So a for loop is something that we can put into VB script functionality. And this for loop will say for next means that you'll keep doing it. It's a loop. And a loop means that it will keep doing something. So it does a column count. And then it will import that column data. And it'll import it into your QTP data table. So that you can say that 1 is the beginning, 1 to the line count means that it will import all of those columns from the beginning, starting from the beginning and going to the very end. So it'll import all of that data, all of the line counts. So it'll count and import all of those lines, and then it'll also count the number of columns and import the number of columns, and it'll import all of that to this sheet. So for next, for loop always ends with next. And then you can see the read data, which equals the fetch cell data, which is something that we did in the beginning. Okay? So this is the code, and you'll have access to the code. You can basically copy this code and try to execute it. So I'm doing just a little bit of a walkthrough for this code. So as you can see, I'm not passing the file path and the column name and all of that. So basically, as you can see here, when I try to import the sheet, right, I'll put in a variable or the file path, a variable called file path. And this is a variable that I pass within my function, okay? So I'm saying to import a sheet, and then what is the path of the sheet? Instead of directly putting the path, I'm just going to say file path, and then I'm going to have the same thing here. So that means when I call the function, I can pass the value of the path of that sheet, okay? So this is part of the fetching data or reading data from the Excel sheet. So using this function, we can actually read a specific column and a specific row. So let's try to use it. Let's save it. So instead of doing this here, instead of importing a sheet, we'll turn this into a comment. Let's comment it. So we'll call that function. So as soon as we write the function name and you press space, you'll see that it's asking for the file path, sheet name, and the column name, and the line count. Okay? So these days you don't really have to memorize a lot of codes. The codes are there. You just have to understand the logic and how to call out the code. You don't have to memorize it. And you can just basically plug and play in certain places. But you need to understand the code for sure. So, file path. Let's put the file path. In this case, let's put a different file. So I created another sheet, which is it's an exact copy of the same thing. Okay. So the lone term. I created another sheet for the framework instead of using my data sheet. I use the QTP framework sheet. So from now on, I need certain other sheets that this workbook has. So this is where we're getting the data from. Okay. So I'll use this path instead. Let's take the properties and we'll get the path of it. Let's copy it here. Whoop, undo. Okay, let's take this. So it is the same path actually, just the file name will be different. So in the function, we'll pass the value for our file, and just be sure to change the file name. In this case, it's QTP framework sheet. Let me make sure that's the right name. Yep, okay, good. .xls, good. And then we pass the second thing, which is the sheet name. If you go back to the function, the first value we have to pass is the path. The second thing that we have to pass is the sheet name. So what is a sheet name? So this is a sheet that we're referring to for our data. So in the next video, we'll continue with fetching and reading this data from the Excel sheet.